Good evening, everyone. My name is Marva Gertzen, and I'm the Alumni Director here at Ambrose University. Ambrose University is located in the territorial district of the Blackfoot people of the Treaty 7 region here in southern Alberta. We are situated on land where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, and the traditional Blackfoot name for this place is Mohkinestsis, which we now call the City of Calgary. The City of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. And I am so delighted that each and every one of you have chosen to participate this evening in the first of our 22-23 public lecture series with our Faculty of Education. At the end of tonight's public lecture, there will be an opportunity for Q&A. And throughout the evening, if there are questions that you would like addressed, please pop them into the box at the bottom of your screen marked Q&A, and we will do our best to get through as many questions as time allows. At this time, I would like to welcome and invite Dr. Gordon T. Smith to introduce our evening lecturers.
Hello, my name is Gordon Smith. I serve as the president here at Ambrose University, and I'm hugely impressed and proud of our education program and the faculty who teach in that program. And what you'll have an opportunity in the next few minutes to hear is both their reflections on the future of education. Things are changing. It's a fluid world, and we need to have a read on what is unfolding. What will that future look like? And you've got an exceptional group of people and a very fine program to be able to equip you for what that program is going to look like, feel like, what it's going to prepare you for, given the changes that are happening in education in our day. So I'm pleased to introduce the head of the program, Sherry Martins, and her colleagues on the Faculty of Education. I think you'll find this to be a very productive and fruitful hour.
Education is usually a hot topic, and both as a noun and a verb, and no more so than lately as the shifting landscapes across kindergarten to post-secondary. And many voices are being heard in a variety of places as to the aims and purposes of all kinds of schooling and what it should be, or what it shouldn't be. And our conversation tonight is intended to highlight how we are both preparing our pre-service teachers to teach in the K-12 setting, as well as consider how post-secondary education considers the student entering university. We believe that we need to merge these ideas so that we can best support all learners across the education spectrum. And we'll begin with a look at curriculum, and then we'll move to aspects of field and expectations of teachers to take into account the Truth and Reconciliations Commission's calls to action. We'll consider how to best support and encourage leaders that we do through our principal certification program. And then we'll take up broader perspectives of inclusion as students move through K-12 into post-secondary. And finally, we'll look forward to how education may be evolving. It's my pleasure, as each member is going to contribute to this conversation, I'll introduce them and have an opportunity just to hear from them as well. So we're going to begin tonight with Nadia Verna, who's our lecturer. And Nadia, thanks for speaking tonight on that connection of the theory to coursework when it comes to curriculum and your experiences so far and what you've seen.
Thank you, Sherry. Yeah, I've had the pleasure of teaching in the curriculum design and program development stream with the education program for the last 2 years. And prior to that, I worked in the field experience as well with Crystal, and was an administrator in Calgary for over 15 years and 10 years as a principal. So I had the opportunity also to have Ambrose pre-service teachers at my school, and very exciting to prepare our pre-service teachers for the education world. And as was mentioned, you know, things are really changing and always trying to evolve to meet the needs of where our society is now and the changes that are happening in education and curriculum. I've really enjoyed teaching in this particular area because I feel that we build a strong foundation for our pre-service teachers. to be confident in planning and delivering effective lessons and learning experiences for children. We really focus in developing lessons that make sense of the explicit curriculum, designing with the end goals in mind, and giving students a variety of opportunities to demonstrate their understanding. Real world connections and how they can apply that to future living disciplines, and as well as cross-curricular opportunities. And this year we've had the opportunity to explore the new Learn Alberta site and what the new curriculum looks like, and have coincided our planning format with the format and design of the new curriculum, and using a lot of that vocabulary and consistency in preparing them for their practicums and going out into the field. So we know that there is a lot for them to cover, and talking to them about what those big rocks or the main ideas are to focus on, and then really taking an inquiry approach and engaging students, meeting them where they're at and where we would like them to go forward. So what I think is really unique about the Ambrose program is that they have the opportunity to go out to schools right away starting in September, and really seeing the connections between what we are talking about in class and what they actually see in classrooms in the field. And so it's really exciting to see them come back and say, what we saw this example of literacy that we've talked about, or we actually saw pre-assessments happening, and that they are making those connections to what they will do practically when they are actually teaching in the classroom. So the why and the how are coming together, and it makes a really powerful impact, I think, on our pre-service teachers. Also builds a lot of their confidence, so that when they go in and they are part of a staff, that they can speak to pieces of assessment and understanding the different levels that kids are at, and how to differentiate for them to make a powerful impact on their learning. So you can already see that starting to happen, and coming back with some of their experiences of where they've been able to work with small groups of students and observe and just see things coming to light. So yeah, it's pretty exciting, and in a very challenging time. They're showing flexibility, resiliency, being really open-minded, having some great conversations. So yeah.
And we'll connect a little bit of the curriculum piece as we go through some of the other sections, but a really great foundational building block, absolutely. I'd like to kind of just segue into, for Crystal Pelletier, who is our Director of Field Experience and also teaches us in the Learning Theory section. Crystal, I know that we've been doing some work quite intentionally around the implementation of what was known as the Teaching Quality Standard 5, or having Indigenous ways of knowing perspectives, understanding histories of treaties, etc. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of that work, and maybe just connect that to some of your own thinking and how that's reflected both, what we do in our classrooms, but more importantly in field as well?
Well, thank you. So I'm Crystal Pelletier, and I'm pleased to be here and just share a little bit about the work that we're doing as a faculty. And I'm grateful for this team and the conversations we get to have together. And so each of you have played such a role in my own learning. And I just think that we model that really well for our students. I think that while these teaching quality standards are a legal requirement of teachers of our profession in the province of Alberta, we try to bring it to life in our own practices, in our own classrooms, to model for our students, but also for them to take out into their practicums. And Nadia sort of alluded to that field experience, and we do have some wonderful field experiences for our students. And I agree, having a cohort model where the students get to be in relationship with each other and build those connections over the 2 years, and for us to bring in people to build relationship with them as well, has been such a great part. And so we really spend time to build that meaningful relationship and connection with elders, knowledge keepers. We've had Métis herbalists lead us through learning, cultural awareness trainings, and times to get on the land. And so the Teaching Quality Standard 5, as we know, is about that foundational Indigenous knowledge, the ways of doing, being, and it's just been something that we've really tried to authentically incorporate into all that we do. So one of the things in field experience is that these areas are parts of our evaluations for our pre-service teachers. And so knowing that that can sometimes be challenging when you're only in a 5-week practicum, some of the things that we've done are to have it as an area of awareness, and has there been an attempt to include these topics into their lesson planning, into their practicum? And so really building a safe space, and I think within our own work, we've used Willie Ermine's work around the ethical space and to build those relationships with our students, with our community here at Ambrose and beyond. So I'm grateful for the opportunity that we've had, even just as a faculty, to do our research, to use medicine wheel protocols to sort of unpack where we've been, where we're going, and what is our responsibility to this work moving forward. And I think that it's allowed us to understand where we've been as a program and how we've grown over time, and what that looks like as we continue to serve the changing needs of educators across the province. So,
Crystal, I'm curious, and we know the impact that they take into classrooms, and I'm thinking too, as we're having groups of students now that are experiencing that work, that teachers are working with them. How does that impact students as they now leave that K-12 setting and come into post-secondary and their own awareness of their civic responsibility and civil responsibilities around those calls to action? Do you see any kinds of connections to that as well?
yeah, so I think just because it has been in the forefront of our minds, we've had a National Day of Truth and Reconciliation recognized now that this is a conversation that's been happening in K-12 for a while. The Truth and Reconciliation calls to action came about in June 2015, and so these are not new, and they're often posted in schools. And some of the things that our students in first year this year have told me is that as they've walked into schools, bulletin boards are present. There's resources available to teachers that are displayed in the school. One school that I walked into this week had a beautiful display with a desk, and students had brought orange crayons and had actually placed them into the jar to just signify the importance of Truth and Reconciliation and Phyllis Webstad's Orange Shirt story as part of Orange Shirt Day. And so I think that these experiences that are real and connected to the practice that they're witnessing in schools, or that they've gone through themselves as a student, shape the fact that they're ready to have these conversations in our classes. And they want to sort of unpack those colonial ideas potentially that have been brought forward throughout their K-12 education, and then to sit with it and understand, okay, what will my responsibility be as a teacher moving forward? What kind of classroom environment do I want to be the teacher that creates this? I often talk in seminar about we create the weather in our classrooms. And so how do we come into that classroom and create a space where the students can actually unpack some of that, sit with the tension of, knowing, our Canadian history that can sometimes be complicated, and then to speak forward with positivity and speak into possibility of how we might create an inclusive space.
It's a beautiful way to say that. Thank you so much. And I know that we have done some really intentional work and around that in authentic ways, which is, I think, still the most important part of that, for sure. So thank you for that contribution. Part of that, too, in what we're talking about in terms of curriculum and the work around Indigenous ways of knowing, is the person who's in a leadership role in that school, who's assisting teachers and ensuring that some of this work is done, again, in authentic and really good ways. And as well as our BEd program here at Ambrose, you're aware that we do a certification for principals. And so Christy and I are involved in that program, and true to our own vision in education, which is shaped by a Christian liberal arts perspective, we do focus on graduating those joyous teachers of excellence that will have the transformative mindsets of hope and grace for the common good in public education. And we have that same transformational experience, we hope, for those who choose to come and do our leadership certification program. And part of it for me is having the influence of now over 160 people that have come through this non-credit program. And everything that we're talking about in our pre-service teacher BEd program is now reflected in the leadership quality program, and that is about relationships. And I'm hearing that word, and I know how important that is for all of us, but having an opportunity to influence the work of future leaders, to also make sure that that's a primacy of their work is hugely important, I think, to all of us. And when I think about the program that we've designed around that, the similarities of, first of all, we ask of our pre-service teachers and also of our principal candidates is to get real and understand yourself. And I always appreciate the level of commitment that all of you take in getting to know the students and really reinforcing those ideas of relationship. Because without that relationship, it's really going to be difficult to even connect, and then the learning, I think, gets lost in different kinds of ways. And I do think that is part of the big success that we have, is that we do spend a lot of time building those connections and relationships, not in a forceful way, but in a way that's just really who we are and the authenticity we want to see in our classrooms as well. And I think that if we can get that sort of modeling through to our pre-service teachers and our principal candidates, that authenticity of that this is the work that we would like to do, I think that's important in how they're going to continue that work into schools. And I certainly hear from our grads and our hiring boards as to why an Ambrose student sticks out and why people choose to come and take the leadership program with us, is that they see that importance in the relationships we carry, but also that preparedness of the theory, with curriculum, in our field experiences, and that married way that we do that in a very interdisciplinary manner. Part of the work that we're seeing, that Christy and I have been looking at in this last few years, is a rise from COVID, but also previous to COVID, around compassion fatigue and moral distress that some of our colleagues are facing in schools. And one of the ways that we've been responding to that is to implement what we call a Get Connected time for people who have gone through our principal courses. And we've offered them a time to actually work on personal development. So we've done the professional piece around their leadership certification, but we think that personal development piece that continues with them is really important. And as a way to kind of support mental well-being and assisting them in helping their school staffs and through their school staffs, their students, with some issues around distress and compassion fatigue that we know is rising in schools, certainly across the country and across most of the world. And so that idea that we've really put forward in our leadership program, that we also do in our education program, is connecting to the heart and the soul. And that opportunity to speak about spiritual formation and where they're understanding themselves from the place of their own understandings of faith. And knowing that our pre-service teachers are coming into a profession where they need to understand themselves and understand how to take care of themselves so they can take care of others. And so we like them to be able to thrive and not just survive, as we continue to tell them. And so opportunities to feed that heart and that soul, I think especially from a Christian university's perspective, is an opportunity to be able to build them up both from the inside out in both their academic work and other ways. And so because we know that, we're not all the same, and we know that we always teach our students from the place from where they come. I want to turn over to you, Kathy, around talking a little bit about how does that work look around how we help our pre-service teachers understand all the different learners they're going to encounter, and how that actually plays into the students that even come to us here at Ambrose. So happy to introduce you as Dr. Catherine Crawford for our alumni that may be watching. It is Dr. Crawford now, and I'm really pleased, and congratulations on finishing your doctoral work last year, Kathy. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So I'm Kathy Crawford, and I have the pleasure of working alongside this group in a lot of collaborative ways. Crystal teaches the learning theory alongside me, and in those courses, we try to help our pre-service teachers understand that there is complexity in our students, and that complexity is normal. And that's a shift in our education system in Alberta in particular. And so when I went through, we still had the special education model. And so as in my teacher training, my minor was in special education, and those were segregated classrooms in which we helped students build skills in order to be able to graduate and become successful in the areas that they were growing into. And oftentimes our goal was to get them back into classrooms with strategies that they needed. But that shift occurred, and now we have inclusive classrooms and teachers who don't often feel equipped to support the diversity of students that are in their classrooms. And that's, neurodiversity, cultural diversity, the experiences that kids have in their homes and the families that they come from. And so always centering those conversations on the dignity of the student. And so knowing that we see these students in a pocket of time in their growth as a person, and that we are helping them grow as people, that they will eventually tell stories of the teachers that they had. How do we be those teachers that position them in a good way, that allowed them to recognize their strengths, develop in those areas they need, and have confidence and be able to speak about themselves in really, really positive ways. And so as we design those classes, we're thinking about cultural fluency on the part of the teacher and of the students, and then thinking about the curriculum and what's present and what's missing. How do we motivate students by connecting to their own self-identity and the goals that they have for themselves? And so through all of that, how do you design learning for that diverse classroom that you have, and how do you as a teacher try to make that the most efficient way possible through those relationships, through that proactive, we talk about it through a universal design lens, so that we can make sure that students see visions of themselves in the textbook, or not the textbooks, but the stories, the curriculum stories, any sports things that they see. So we want them to have a sense of how do you design for motivation, for joy, transforming our students, and then also transforming ourselves through the interactions we have with our students. And so with those inclusive classrooms, while it's really challenging, the benefits really, there's a lot of research out there that shows that students who are not neurodiverse and who have student or peers in their class that are neurodiverse, they actually have positive outcomes. And so some of those are being able to see their peers as having good attributes, in the future hiring a diverse network themselves, being able to connect in different ways. And so societally, that increases that value for each other. Unfortunately, we know that the supports in the schools aren't often enough to help the students who are neurodiverse develop themselves to the extent that we hope. And so I think that's something that we can continue to work on. The impact of that as they come into higher education is that these are kids, students, growing adults who they themselves have learned alongside a group of kids that are culturally diverse. They have different experiences in their homes. They have a familiarity with the language around that and the acceptance of that. And so when they come into institutions of higher education, I think they expect, to be able to still self-advocate, engage with curriculum in different ways, to be able to, use different tools. The world that they live in is changing so fast, and they're an adaptable group of kids. And so how do we, as in higher education, make sure that we're adjusting our practices and our pedagogies so that we can continue that, creative, professional, and self-development, so that as they leave our programs, they continue that in the field that they're in. And so it's an exciting time, I think, to be in conversation with our pre-service teachers about that complexity and that neurodiversity, and seeing it as a gift and a productive challenge, and thinking about that society that we're creating beyond that K-12 experience for them.
Thanks, Kath. And I'm wondering if you could maybe unpack the word of neurodiversity. So
Yeah.
how would we describe, and what might be some of those attributes of someone who might identify as being more neurodiverse?
So commonly we think about it in terms of we have rethinking students who have often been marginalized, maybe put into special education classrooms. So previously, our students who have ADHD, we can now think about that as an ability to multitask and think more in more abstract and complicated ways, be able to manage a lot of different things, which is a great attribute to have as a teacher, when you're able to notice lots of things going on in your classroom and adjust in different ways once you get your planning and organization done. But that's where the teamwork is really, really good. Perhaps kids, young adults who have autism. We've had some kids who come through our program with these different ways of thinking about the world and engaging with the world, and how they would probably describe their experiences of being included or disincluded. And so thinking about meeting the needs of kids who have dyslexia or dyscalculia, maybe some communication disorders. And so they've been able to develop a self-advocacy and a diversity in how they engage in their own learning that's shown that there's a lot of success for them. And so when they come into our programs, just us listening to them, being willing to, shape our assignments and the ways that they're engaging, so that their peers are hearing about that. And I think that in the profession, I know with our relationships that we have with the different school districts, we have neurodiverse teachers out there who are thriving and being incredible role models for the students in their classrooms. And so, yeah, just those different ways of thinking, and sometimes what we've historically called learning disabilities, thinking about them in ways that they, it's hopefully our environments aren't disabling, and instead there's supports that help minimize those barriers for them so that they can do what they're good at.
That's great. Thanks, Kathy. And I really like that shift. Certainly, I know in my own teaching experience of the shift from being a disabled piece to seeing it just as this is how my brain is different, and just being welcoming of all the ways and different ways that people think and what that looks like. And you're absolutely correct. I know then talking with our principal candidates, and one of the challenges that they face is how then are we working alongside of teachers who are also not thinking the way that everyone else, and they are absolutely seen as this is a good thing, and having those opportunities to actually engage with kids in different ways and experience all the ways that their learning can contribute to that learning of kids, and it's really important. So thank you for that. And we'll be talking a little bit more about some of those implications as we go a little bit further on, so thank you. Finally, I want to hear from Dr. Christy Thomas, one of our assistant professors. And Christy, I'd asked you kind of to consider if you want to just continue this idea of like what future thinking. I know you had an opportunity to attend a really interesting conference in London this last spring around technology and some online learning opportunities, and just that shifting perspective of what education could be. And so we'll finish off this part of our conversation with you, and just some thoughts you have on what you've been able to think about and some of the things that you were part of at the conference.
Sure, for sure. Thanks. Great to be here with everybody. And thanks for those people watching online as well, engaging with our lecture tonight. I think one thing that's interesting as we kind of look ahead in our conversations, I think what I have to speak about is kind of around the post-secondary kind of considerations, not just for the School of Education, but beyond. But obviously our teacher education program, along with other post-secondary institutions, had to pivot online during the pandemic. And that included graduate programs, included undergraduate programs. And we all know that was really challenging for faculty, it was challenging for students. And a lot of institutions, including Ambrose, we sought to support our faculty in making that experience for students the best we could. And I think I'm really proud of people at Ambrose, our faculty, our sessionals, and how people were able to pivot and were able to kind of shift their thinking about their teaching practice and consider what that could look like in an online space, right? In such a short time, really in like emergency response types of ways of looking at teaching. But I think that what was really interesting about that is the opportunities across our campus, I know in particular, where faculty came together, we supported each other. There was lots of peer conversations, there was workshops, we had outside guests come and join us and support us in that work. But one of the things that I think that's come out of that is our conversations as faculty, is the importance of those peer conversations. Not even just external workshops and speakers to help us think about our practice, but just supporting each other and continuing to think about our own development, our own growth in our teaching practice. And not just in terms of online teaching, but regardless of modality. So I think as we move forward, I think there's some opportunities for us to continue to create those spaces for faculty to come together, to bring our sessionals together, to continue those conversations so that we can commit to and continue forward in excellence in teaching. And I think the interruptions, like many people have found, caused us to reflect and pause and go, why are we doing this? What can we do better? But also I think it's making us consider, like I just remember talking to Nadia the other day, we were talking about our exhibition that we always used to do face to face. But now we're thinking, well, what did we learn during the pandemic? We actually found our virtual exhibitions were actually really great because we were able to connect with our school partners, we were able to connect with people who might only have an hour out of their day, and all of a sudden now we're able to bring all those people in an online space, interact with our students, and they get this great feedback, great connection with school partners and other university professors, et cetera. And so I think that as we move forward, we're continuing to wonder how can technology be effectively used, whatever modality, if we're trying to teach blended, hybrid, online, or even face-to-face, right? How do we build those bridges with that? And so that kind of leads me to this conference that I attended in May, and it was a EdTech World Forum, and it brought together post-secondary institutions across the world, EdTech companies, including Google and Coursera, and there was a lot of conversations around educational technology, of course, because that was the theme of the conference. But one of the big things that came out of that was this notion of flexibility. And I think we're all familiar with it coming out of the pandemic, or at where we're at right now, is this not only in the workplace flexibility, but also in terms of learners. So learners who are attending post-secondary institutions are looking for flexibility. And I think that connects to what Kathy was just talking about in terms of inclusion and thinking about, in particular, the conversation there was really about equity and accessibility, equitable approaches to for education and technology that can support that, post-secondary institutions considering that. And some of these companies, these EdTech companies, are offering very flexible designs for learners, certificates that are affordable, they're equitable, they're available, and even provide them with some credentials for the workplace, where degrees are often the credentials for the workplace in some places. And post-secondary institutions are also doing this work, coming up with stackable courses that can lead towards degrees. So I think it's kind of interesting just being in that sort of global conversation. But I was thinking about this idea of how do we as post-secondary institutions continue to look at possibilities for flexible designs. So not just in terms of our teaching practice, but also in terms of our program design, our delivery, and things like that. One of the other pieces that came out of some recent research that I've had the opportunity to be part of is a SSHRC grant looking at group work online. And in the recent Policy Horizons document from 2018, one of the emerging trends that was recognized was this emerging asocial society. And that's really interesting because it shows that there's an increase in loneliness and social disconnection. So I think what we can learn from that, and as we all are reflecting on the pandemic here, is the importance of people connecting. And this gets back to what Sherry was talking about in terms of relationships. Our students want to reconnect, our faculty wants to reconnect. And I think that's really tied to overall mental health and wellness as well, and supporting our faculty and our students in that, and creating those spaces to bring people together. And lastly, I just want to connect that to Kathy Crawford's work and a study that was more specifically connected to teacher education programs. Kathy was part of some work with Patricia Daniluk, Amy Burns, and Laurie Hill. And they did a study on crisis and opportunity, how Canadian Bachelor of Education programs responded to the pandemic. And they showed that the pandemic really created opportunities for teacher education programs across Canada to actually take risks, to reimagine, to reevaluate. And I think a lot of us are in that space, and that's what that study actually showed. But I really liked the suggestions that were offered in this study, and I think it's something for us to consider as we move forward. One is paying attention to pre-service teacher mental health and wellness. Continue to re-examine programs, how well they meet the needs of pre-service teachers, and attending to inequities that resulted from the shift to online teaching and learning and continue to persist. They weren't just from online teaching and learning, but especially as they impact BIPOC communities. So I think that gives us a lot to think about as we move forward, and lots of connections to the previous things that were already shared. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Christy. And I guess I'm curious too, because there's that notion of people being very lonely, even though they're connected in terms of that social sense. And so the idea that there's opportunities to be online, as you're saying, like in the virtual exhibition, for example, and then other times where maybe that's not the best option. So
Right.
having that opportunity to pivot to whatever kind of format or whatever is needed. And I think that's too, it's about reading our students.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that you all do really well as well. We know that, you know, how they're doing in that context. And we know that there's an opportunity to bring a person in on the camera if they need to be, if they need that kind of space, or in some instances, for some of our students who may be a little more introverted, or they are more challenged by being in space where they're speaking in front of a lot of other people, to be able to do that in small groups as we've always done in classrooms, but also give them that chance to do that in an online forum where they are just in a breakout room and then bring it back to the larger space. I think I'm really fascinated by how we could utilize that in different kinds of ways
Yep.
to kind of be able to operate that in multiple situations. So I think there's incredible opportunity for
Yeah,
what that can look
definitely
like.
possibilities for sure.
And I think it's actually the most part of that possibility is the openness that you all have to just being willing to jump in and take that risk. And that risk taking as a teacher is what we're trying to model for our students, and,
Yeah.
and just doing that. And sometimes failing miserably, which is how we learn, because we're not perfect in that, which is the best possible scenario.
Yeah.
That's part of learning.
That is
That is.
absolutely a part of learning. And that's sometimes a hard lesson for some of our pre-service teachers to learn as they come in and are really focused sometimes on the grades. And a little surprised when I say, I don't really care what your grades were. I know you did what you did, but no principal is going to ask you what your grades were. But they are going to wonder about the relationships you have with your kids,
Yep.
who you are in that space, and how you're bringing the best possible learning opportunities to the students that you're serving. And so that's a shift for them.
Yeah.
And then just even talking to some of our students now in the last couple of weeks as I've watched them popping in and out of their classrooms and as they're now gathering in different spaces, and the energy that we feel is because I think, as I said to a few of them, what's different for you now than your last degree? And I talked to a young man this week and he said, I am so passionate. I can't believe I like doing the readings. I can't wait to do my homework. He said, I've actually said that to my family. Can you just leave me alone? I really want to do these readings. And even his parents, because he's moved back home to help in his to finish this degree, and his parents were sort of shocked. They're like, "What are you doing?" I got to get this done. I'm really excited. And so being able to have that kind of engagement and level of engagement also tells me that we're doing some right things for them in their own learning, and that's something I think too that we need to consider. We take into account their learning, their style, their situations, and all those different pieces. And I wonder how that can translate into post-secondary in general, if they can have that kind of enthusiasm and passion
Yeah.
in every aspect of post-secondary, how amazing, would that be? And I think that's a great opportunity for us here at Ambrose, because we are relationship-driven in the different things that we do, and very passionate in our own disciplines across both arts and science, and certainly in theology. Any other comments or anything you want to kind of clarify amongst ourselves before I turn it over to the greater audience? Anything anyone wants to say?
I think just listening to each person speak and just hearing the connections between our core streams as well as what they're seeing in the field, I think that consistency is really sparks a lot of that excitement, because they don't see it as individual pieces. Like they're all important pieces for teaching, and and what we give them to read is things that are really applicable. And yeah, it just is very motivating. So it was great to listen to you speak about, your pieces as well. And I think, that really jives with what we're talking about.
Definitely.
Yeah, they can hear that. So yeah.
And I think even not just readings, but we're in a time when there's so many different tools available to, for our students to access. We use first-person stories a lot, so we'll pull in TikTok and Twitter and those kinds of things too that help them think about, not just the academic aspect, but the lived aspect of what they're hearing from us and what we're asking them to think about.
Yeah.
And so I think that's been another, it's fun for us to design with those kind of ideas in mind. And when we have partner schools who also share what's going on in their school, we often get tagged in Twitter with things and stuff. And so that's also a really fun way for that, different different way of thinking about knowledge and where knowledge is coming from and who has access to it and how we're actually engaging it in the teaching and learning we're doing.
Thank you. I will turn it over back to Marva. There's some questions now, Marva, from the audience that we could address for anyone.
Well, if anybody has questions, feel free to put them in the chat right now. At this point, we don't have any yet, Sherry, that are here. But I would just like to thank all of you ladies for that insight. It's been a great joy and very educational. I don't mean to say that as a pun.
That's our game.
That's your game. Well, you're on your game then. It was a fantastic presentation. And I'm just really grateful to have been able to be a part of this evening. I don't see any questions coming in tonight. We've got a few people in the room. So it looks like we have a question in the room. So just go ahead and state your name and then your question.
Craig Harding. So my question is, and this talk was about the future of education, so I'm going to ask you to do some crystal ball gazing. There's no doubt that a crossroads is looming in education. And as an example, we've had 21st century learning now for 22 years, and it's taken for granted. But there seems to be a great potential for change. And I'd just like you to look into your crystal ball and see what challenges lay ahead of us and what opportunities there are for us in education.
Thanks, Craig. For our alumni watching, are you surprised that Craig had a question? Thanks for that. I appreciate that. I'll begin, and I think as I started this conversation around this, is education's a hot topic, and I think the polarization of opinion is actually creating some silos in ways that we've certainly never seen. And I know that in some of the research I've been reading in the leadership stream, that polarization of opinion has created some situations where teachers are feeling uneasy around what they can and cannot say, what they should and should not say, and an opportunity for us to have conversation around what is some of the ideas that we're putting forward. And I'm concerned that I see a curriculum that is focused primarily in skills, which we've always taught, which is super important in numeracy and literacy. But in that 21st century learning and things that we've been reporting to parents in report cards across multiple districts for the last 20 years, is that we are interested in their citizenship. We are interested in their personal development, and we are interested in their character. In fact, those three things are aspects that in fact aren't new. And when I think of some of the work that I use in curriculum and alongside of Craig, where we actually look at historic report cards and we say, you can tell a lot about a society and what they valued by looking at what they asked their students to be reported on. What did they think was imperative? And I was just thinking yesterday of, what would people think 40 years from now if they read a report card today? What will they think of us in now 2022 to 2025, 26? How will they envision this shift of how come we're no longer thinking about all of these other aspects? And I know there is a political agenda around parents educating their children in some of these ways, and this is somehow a return to, but in all honesty, we go back to the 1800s, and schools were still the primary place where they reported on a student's deportment, where they reported on their cleanliness, their hygiene, their ability to get along with others. And in fact, those were reported in negative ways. And so the report card didn't reflect positive things. They actually reflected, one of my favorite comments I saw was the student apt to mischief. I would have loved to have had that checked off for me as a child, but yeah, apt to mischief. And we would actually applaud that today. As Kathy's saying, that's a curiosity we'd look for. So my crystal ball is is on the lines of what will happen in the polarization. I think if we allow voices to overshadow that of what is the common good for all people and for what we're expecting for children into the future, who do we want in that sense of what we're looking for? And I still think the beginning of those you're right, Craig, 22 years ago of our 21st century competencies was still around a literate person who was concerned around the societal good and all of what that might encompass. And being able to be participating in a way that was very positive. So that's just from my take, and I thank you for that question, and I'll turn over to Kathy and others on the group.
So in working in the area that I work in, I have a wonder about it, not a crystal ball, but maybe a crystal ball that's phrased as a wonder. We have a generation of students who were encouraged to know themselves and advocate. And I wonder if they'll tolerate that going backwards. And so there's been a lot of platforms for people being able to amplify their voice and their experience. And people who know that how they had learned or the spaces that they were put into wasn't in their best interest over time or in the moment. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of advocacy for ensuring that there is inclusion. And so I think that there's going to be a tension around those conversations as we go forward, which I think needs to be there because that's not a school conversation, that's a society conversation. And so if we're willing to silence those voices in our schools and therefore our society, I think there'll be implications for that. And I hope that that we can listen to the voices of the people who've benefited from the change and the hard work that was done by teachers, done by schools, done by the parents, done by the students in the curriculum writers and all of those spaces to make more equitable spaces for all of our people that went through school.
Thanks, Kath. Go ahead, Crystal.
I think I would just build on that again. Not a crystal ball. My name's Crystal. I don't have a crystal ball. But I think, Kathy, in many of our conversations that we talk about possibilities. And I really hope that going forward, something that being on this team is it gives me hope that our reach in our classrooms goes beyond to where our students go and how they go and lead their classrooms. And we never know what that's going to look like. And so I just think there's that sense of possibility and again, bringing a sense of wonder, getting curious, asking those questions. And when we're not understanding something to go, okay, what's another way I could look at this? Or how can we help each other to see it in a different way? How can we think differently? How can we think outside the box? Because the students that our pre-service teachers are going to teach over their career are going out into a world where it's so different than what we've experienced growing up ourselves. We know that those students that are in K-12 right now are going to go out and have multitudes of job opportunities in different formats than a traditional career that we are preparing teachers for. So I just think that's an interesting place to be, and I just see possibility and hope moving forward.
And can I jump
Please,
in too? I was going to speak to possibility as well. I think we have an amazing opportunity to come together, to collaborate. That's my theme. If my husband was here, he would chuckle at me because I say that all the time. But we need each other. We have these tensions, we have these complexities, but we have an opportunity for education to come together as educators, to come together as society, to make the world a better place for everybody. And in education, we can do that. We've got the potential to put our heads together, to solve these problems together, to work together. And I think that's what's really exciting to see with our pre-service teachers is how they're leaning on each other, they're building relationships with each other and with other educators. And that's, if there was a crystal ball in this case, that would be my hope, is that we actually do rely on each other. We support each other in this work. And I think we can do that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, ladies. It's been great to have you with us here this evening. We can appreciate all of your words of wisdom. For those of you that are with us online, again, thanks so much for joining us. And be sure to check out our public lecture page, as we have 4 more public lectures coming up this academic year. Our next one will take place in November, where science and church collide or meet together. I guess it's a better way of saying it. You won't want to miss that with Dr. Matthew Morris. Again, good night, and thanks for joining us.